Today I'd like to introduce to you the best opening for white, especially if you're rated under 1600. And there is no better player to illustrate how to do it right than Paul Morphy, known for his fascinating style of playing. Now, we got to this position from the first king's pawn move, and after that, initially we play standard moves, but then you switch to the Scotch game. But after your opponent takes the pawn, you do not recapture, you instead play the Scotch Gambit, bishop c4. You just aim to finish your development quickly and go into that all-out attack. And with so many traps that are available in this opening, it becomes a truly challenging task for your opponent even to equalize the game. By the way, notice that in this particular position, there is no rook on a1, because someone told Morphy that that's the right starting position of the game. Just kidding. I mean, Morphy was an unofficial world champ at the time, and there were not many players who could put up any resistance against him, and so he played odd chess, giving up the rook at the beginning of the game. Anyway, after bishop c4, your opponents are going to have a number of options. In this game, his opponent, Le Carpentier, played bishop b4 check. Definitely a very tempting move, and we're gonna talk about that in a moment. But just so that you know how to play it, regardless of what your opponent chooses to play here, there are also two other main options that, in the vast majority of the cases, your opponents are going to choose apart from bishop b4 check. These are either bishop c5 or knight f6. Now, let me show you how to play it so that right after watching this video, you know how to crush it with the Scotch Gambit. Now, if your opponent chooses to play bishop c5, a very natural move, just protecting this pawn on d4 and saying, hey, you're not going to get it back. Then you kind of pretend like you gave up on that idea and just play c3, simply trying to develop your knight. So your opponent thinks, okay, I'm going to take here, your opponent's going to recapture. And in most cases, your opponents will actually take this pawn, because if not, it feels like you're going to do this and attack the bishop. So the easiest solution for black is clearly to take. Now at this point, they obviously expect you to recapture, but instead you take this pawn right here. And after your pawn recaptures, it turns out that there's a massive follow-up queen d5 check. And on the next move, you get back your piece, and then you attack your opponent for free without any sacrifices. And basically that is devastating, because your opponent's skin is just so that open that it's very easy to continue your attack after that. So that's how you're going to deal with bishop c5. But also, the other half of your opponents are probably going to play knight f6. Kind of natural move, developing a knight and getting ready to castle on one of the next moves. But the issue here is that you can push your pawn forward and chase away this time from f6. It doesn't have many good squares to go to, because it's going to be vulnerable everywhere. And obviously your opponent does not want to undevelop it back. And if they go something like knight g4, kind of pretending to attack this pawn e5, you can actually ignore it completely and just castle. And now your opponent is already at a disadvantage, because this knight is misplaced, you can always attack it, and if it ever goes back to h6, you can take it and ruin his pawn structure. But if they ever try to take over here, then they fail due to this pin along the e-file. And the knight is attacked. If they try to defend it, you just play f4. The knight is still pinned down to the king, therefore can't run away. On the next move, you're going to win the piece and win the game. So that just goes to show how easy it is for you to win if your opponent simply plays natural, careless moves. Back to the actual game, black played bishop b4, check to the king, a very natural move. Now, in this position, you do not want to waste time and just cover up your king somehow. Instead, you play c3. We're playing in a gambit style, so we're prioritizing quick development. Now, after your opponent recaptures, basically there are two good options for you to choose from. One is to recapture with the pawn, because that gives you a tempo to attack this bishop. But what Morphy did is also pretty cool, is just castling, letting your opponent capture over here, and in the game he did, because if not, again, you can either recapture with the knight and then jump forward, or recapture with the pawn and gain a tempo. So his opponent chooses to take over here, and right now, although he's 2 pawns up, well, in this context, he's also a rook up, which is more significant, but normally you would be just 2 pawns down. However, you've got this massive leading development and huge opportunities for your attack. Now, right now, this bishop from b2 hits this pawn on g7 and x-rays the rook. And it's actually, strangely enough, not easy for black to cope with this simple threat, because if they try to use the knight, then you still push the pawn forward, and again, there are no good squares for the knight to go to. It's going to be vulnerable everywhere. Like if it goes here, there are all kinds of threats. For example, queen d5 hitting this pawn as well as this knight. We've got also the bishop, which lines up, and black is already kind of in trouble. So wherever the knight goes is going to be in trouble. And if not knight f6, then what else can black do to... Not this one, this one. What else can black do to defend their pawn? Like going f6 is pretty ugly. It also opens up this diagonal, meaning black won't be able to castle, because our bishop controls this square. so also not a good option. Just moving the king, again, then the king is going to be stuck in the middle of the board without being able to castle. So in the game, black ultimately decided to just bring the bishop all the way back to f8. Now, of course, it's always sad. Whenever your opponent does that, you can always encourage them to play knight b8 on the next move and start the next game. But anyway, in this game, he just played bishop f8, and as we can see, it makes sense, actually. Now, then Morphy played e5, just say, hey, you're not going to develop your knight easily. And indeed, black has some issues on how to actually finalize his development. He decided to play d6, trying to trade off this pawn. Morphy responded rook e1, wanting to target the king. After black took on e5, white recaptured. Now, that was an interesting moment here, actually. In the game, black took on d1, because it feels like the best thing for black to do. Usually, as you trade off queens, your opponent can no longer attack you. Now, an interesting question is, how about knight takes e5 first? What would white do here? Well, hopefully Morphy would find the crushing shot here. I'll give you a couple seconds. You can try to find out the right move on your own. The winning move is not just to recapture the knight, but bishop takes f7. Like, really beautiful. It capitalizes on the fact that the knight is pinned, and black can't take this bishop with the knight. They have to move the king. But as they do so, that leaves the queen on d8 undefended, and we can grab it. So you're now one material, plus this knight is still attacked. If it goes somewhere, then queen e8 is just checkmate. So that's how white could completely devastate black within a couple moves. In the actual game, black took the queen, which seems to be like almost a winning move for black. Because if white just recaptures, then black is simply up a rook. Again, let's not forget that Morphy gave that head start to his opponent prior to the game. So rook d1 is not an option. However, Morphy found a powerful in-between move. Bishop takes f7 check. Now, what can black do? It does not feel right to go to the d file, because then white would recapture the queen with check. Although computers suggest that this is the best move to play, but I understand that from a human standpoint, it doesn't feel good to go there. For example, if black would cover with the bishop, white can trade, check to the king, and then white can execute this long-term threat of bishop takes g7 hitting the rook, and white gets some material back. So that's probably what black calculated and decided not to go here. Instead, his opponent played king e7, probably still expecting white to just recapture the queen. However, white came up with another creative move. Instead of this, he played knight to g6. Quite a sudden move, not capturing anything, but just delivering this double check. And whenever there is a double check, the only thing that your opponent can do is to move the king. Now, if king goes here, once again, white would recapture the queen with check, plus the rook is hanging over here, and feels like that's the step in the wrong direction. But of course, the major question is, hey, how about black simply grabbing the bishop? And that's what he did in the game. And all of a sudden, knight takes h8 came with a checkmate. There's a saying, a knight on the rim is green, but here it became a grim reality for black. If you enjoyed this fascinating opening, then I've got another video where I go more in depth on the main lines. You can check it out right here. And if you want to know how to find such attacking moves on your own, even if you happen to forget opening theory, you can check out this free masterclass over there. Either way, have fun, take care.